Hello, fellow drinkers at the Jolly Heretic, resident poet here, and a hello again to those of us who've joined from history debunked. Now, hopefully most of you caught Ed's stream last night on the Jolly Heretic, where he had the guest by the name of Not So Obvious, who, very informative and entertaining stream last night, I thought, and Not So Obvious gave us a bit of a lowdown on psychology, localism, and a bit of freedom fighting thrown into the mix. So very good stuff there, and it prompted me to write a poem. We welcome a keen basket weaver. In community, he's a believer, a proud lotus eater, and also a tweeter. One might say a real high achiever. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Turning now to Ed's quick pints that he produced earlier on this week. One of them was entitled Why the Woke Dislike the Spiteful Mutant Theory. Now, Ed rebutted their objections with aplomb, as always. And now, as I think one of the commenters said, proves the old Royal Air Force adage, you only get flack when you're heading near the target. So, as always, it did indeed prompt me to write a quick line or two. The mutants are thirsty for power, but this is no reason to cower. In this they will fail, their efforts grow stale. They're just feeling bitter and sour. And another quick pint Ed came up with later on in the week was as to the subject of how neurotics can be both liberal, i.e. left-wing, and conservative, i.e. right-wing. I think generally mediated by religion, but it was a very interesting little subject there. I mean, I think often the common perception is that most of the neurotics are on the liberal side of the spectrum. In any case, though, it did prompt me to write a couple of lines. It's true that if one is neurotic, there's a leaning towards the despotic, with women and men, even now and again, with those that are frankly lesbotic. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Now, turning towards our great friend Simon and History Debunked and his output this week, prodigious as ever. He did release a little video on the subject of the Tate Gallery in London, who are employing a drag queen to entertain children, which I would have thought is fairly controversial in itself. And it prompted me to write a couple of lines. What on God's earth can this mean? For children, a great big drag queen. In an art gallery and paid a huge salary, I'm not sure that folks are so keen. And then after that, Simon treated us to a little video on the tax affairs of former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi, something that's been in the news recently. Our Nadhim has been a bit lax on matters related to tax. His £3 million, I'm sure, can be found in order to cover his tracks. Now, in the past, Simon has said in one of his videos that having quite so many senior figures in the British government with links to countries other than the UK might be a bit problematic, which is a fair point, although I was thinking that perhaps it might lead to strengthening of the relations between the UK and these ministers' countries of origin. It's just food for thought. But in any case, it did remind me of rather a funny story, which hopefully I can now tell to you. Many years ago, there was a junior trade minister who was sent out to a nation in deepest, darkest Central Africa on a trade mission. So the guy gets off the plane and almost immediately he's ushered into a large hall which is full of local dignitaries and businessmen and women where he is to give a speech. So he gets up into the podium, a bit nervous, and he starts by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and privilege to be here in your beautiful country." And the crowd go, "Huzinga, Huzinga, Huzinga." So the guy's a bit put off by this. But anyway, he carries on and he says, "Now, in the past, relationship between your great nation and the United Kingdom have been fraught. But I believe that through trade and international diplomacy, both nations can prosper and lead each other to broad, sunlit uplands." And the crowd continue with greater ferocity this time by going, "Huzinga, Huzinga, Huzinga." And the guy thinks, well, let's continue. And he says, "As a representative of Her Majesty's government, I can now tell you all today with great pleasure that there is now in place a trade agreement, which by lowering tariffs to virtually zero, it will lead to increased prosperity beyond your wildest dreams for both nations." And the crowd go absolutely wild at this, so it would seem, and they start chanting, "Huzinga, Huzinga, Huzinga, Huzinga." So the minister thinks, well, better quit while I'm ahead. So he rounds off his speech with a few, bland remarks. And then he climbs down from the podium and is immediately met by his local counterpart. And the British minister says, well, I think that speech went pretty well, don't you? And his local counterpart says, perhaps, sir. But anyway, the next item on the agenda is a trip to a local cattle farm some miles away. You must understand there will be some very, very strong orders from the animals. And the minister says, yes, I understand that. And then his counterpart says, another piece of advice. I would wear some boots. You do not want to trade in the HUZINGA. So hopefully you enjoyed that little story there about how sometimes there are little misunderstandings on the international scene between representatives of two nations. Later on in the week, Simon alerted us to the rather expensive renaming of Black Boy Lane in the London borough of Haringey, Tottenham, to be precise. That was a thing that's been in the news here in the UK. I now note also that the sign, since the renaming, has been defaced so that only the original name is visible. So a bit of a waste of time there. But anyway, prompted me to write a quick poem. New lunacy we see again. The renaming of Black Boy Lane. A complete waste of time. The cost was a crime. But woe betide if you complain. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hard on the heels of that, Simon produced a little video on artillery damage in World War II, and that's damage to British civilians and property from their own artillery, which was something I was pretty shocked about, but obviously Simon is the expert there. From Simon we learn of the war, how bombing did cause us much gore. Now called friendly fire, it sounds very dire. It's something we all should abhor. And finally then, I think Simon came up with this yesterday, with the story of a lady in America who made a film that wasn't sadly nominated for an award. And she seemed to think that this was entirely due to the oppressive European male patriarchy, etc., etc. And I thought I'd write a few lines on that. So the film did not get an award, yet everything was above board. I personally think that her moaning does stink. Let's hope that she's roundly ignored. So that was my poetic roundup of this week's output from Ed Dutton, the landlord of the Jolly Heretic, and Simon Webb, the man behind History Debunked. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do like and or subscribe using the buttons below. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we'll see each other very soon. Goodbye.